Hey everyone, it's Forrest here, and today we will be going through a guide for balloon battle percent speedruns in Mario Kart DS. In this guide, there will be PowerPoint slides detailing the various strategies you can use, and there will also be footage of previous runs in which I will break down when and where these strategies are used. The balloon battle percent is a category extension, which means that it is not submitted to the Mario Kart players page, but is instead submitted to speedrun.com. The objective of a balloon battle speedrun is to eliminate all 7 computer players, or CPUs for short, in a battle as fast as possible, either by hitting them with things like shells or stars, or by stealing their balloons with mushroom items. There are 6 unique battle stages in this game, and a different leaderboard exists for each one on SRC. You can view the leaderboards by modifying the stage filter on SRC, as shown below. Category rules involve modifying the 4 customizations you need before you start a battle. The first and most important variable is computer difficulty. You can use any of the difficulties for a speedrun, but if you want to get the fastest times, you should use the easy difficulty because you don't have to hit each CPU as many times, and you don't have to worry as much about defending yourself from their attacks since they do not target you. The second customization is course selection, which could be choose, in order, or random. If you want to practice a battle as many times as you want to have the setting to choose. And for rules, it is either free or the first participant to get to a maximum number of wins wins the whole battle. Again, if you want to practice for long periods of time, you want to have these rules set to free so that you're not forced out of the game. And for teams, you need to have them off. It is unacceptable to have teams on because when you have teams on, you only need to eliminate 4 CPUs instead of the 7, providing the player with an unfair advantage. Now let's discuss timing rules. There is an in-game timer in Mario Kart, exactly like the one in the time trials category, that starts at 0 and counts upwards from 0 as the battle goes on. For individual stages, you use this timer to determine the final time of your run. It begins at 0 and finishes whenever either the last remaining CPU is hit with, let's say, a shell or star, or when its last balloon is stolen or lost from respawning. These cases are a bit different because when you hit them with a shell, they tumble for a second or so before being eliminated, but that's not relevant because once they're hit with the shell, the win is guaranteed, so time can be considered over at that point. When a computer loses its last balloon from a steal or from respawning, they don't tumble for a second, and they instead are eliminated immediately, and their balloon counter would go to 0. So in this screenshot here, Waluigi has been hit with a red shell, and even though he's not gone yet, he's considered eliminated because the win is guaranteed. So the run can be considered finished at 59.123 seconds. The reason I point out that the timing is a bit different when a computer has a balloon stolen or respawns is that when they're tumbling from this hit here, you can pause the game to take a picture of your speed run, which still counts as valid proof so long as it is not a world record run. However, when a computer loses its balloon instantly from a steal or respawn, there is no ability for the player to pause. So if you want to take a picture to submit your runs, you need to make sure that the last computer gets hit with a shell and not a mushroom and not out of bounds either. Let's talk about differences in controls. There's two ways that you can use items. You can use the X button over here, or you can use the L trigger button behind your DS. For 3DS users, you have the choice of either using the D-pad or the analog stick. Personally, I think that the analog stick is a much more comfortable option if you have that. So if you have both a DS and a 3DS, I recommend that you run Balloon Battle on your 3DS. For using items, sometimes it's inconvenient to use the L trigger because you might want to use the R trigger to hop instead, and you might get your nerves mixed up and press the wrong trigger, which can derail a run quickly. So for this reason, I often use X to use items, and I do sometimes use the L trigger, though. You can use both on any given run, and sometimes it's convenient to use a hybrid method because sometimes your thumb will be on the A and B button at the same time, and it's harder to use X, so you have to use the L trigger. Now, what I do not recommend for 3DS users is to use both the D-pad and the L trigger, because what you do with that combination is that you have your thumb way low on this D-pad here, and then you need to have an outstretched index finger to press L. This is extremely uncomfortable. This combo works a bit better on the DS because the D-pad is closer. And that concludes everything for controls. Now let's move on to the most influential part of Balloon Battle, the items. Here's a list of every item in Mario Kart DS. I've crossed out the ones that are not available in Balloon Battle, and I've given the remaining ones a letter grade based on how much they contribute to a speedrun's success. The A-tier items are the red shell, triple red shells, and stars because they're either extremely consistent or provide reliable ways of getting multiple hits. The B-tier items are the green shells, triple green shells, and bob-ombs. They can also provide ways to get multiple hits, but they're not as consistent, since you have to aim the green shell or bomb where you think the computer is going, which can be difficult to do sometimes. Mushrooms, triple mushrooms, and the blooper are all C-tier items, which means that they're bad, but they're not awful because if you get one of them, you have an easy course of action. You can just use up the item, go to the nearest item box, and hope you get something better, so you only lose a few seconds if you get one of those. The D-tier items are the golden mushrooms and boos, which take up a lot of time because you can't use them immediately, and there are few instances where they are actually useful in a speedrun. Now the question is, how can you maximize your chances of getting A-tier and B-tier items? It's time for a lesson from the School of RNG. Here's a list of probabilities for each item. The probabilities vary based on how many balloons the player has at any given point, and the best mix of items is by far the mix they get when they only have one balloon. For this reason, it's recommended that players only play with one balloon and they don't inflate a second one and rarely steal a CPU's balloon, because that means that you're stuck with a worse mix of items. As long as you play with just one, you get a 5 in 8 chance of getting an A-tier item and a 15% chance of getting a B-tier item, which means that over 3/4 of the time, you'll get a good item for your run. However, the items you get are not the only luck component of Balloon Battle percent. They are the most important one, but there are 3 others, which I have ranked in order of importance. First, there's CPU balloons. Assuming you play on easy difficulty, a CPU will only have a maximum of 3 balloons. They'll always start the battle by inflating a second one, and they'll sometimes inflate a third one. A tasser and speedrunner called Anthony found out that it's basically a 50% shot because he sampled over 2,000 computers, and he found that almost exactly half of them chose to inflate a third balloon at the beginning. It's more favorable for a computer to inflate 2 balloons at the start rather than 3, because there are 2 ways you can save time if a computer only chooses to inflate 2 balloons. Here's an example of one of the time saves. You want to watch Peach and Drybones here. They start with 2 balloons, and around 20 seconds or so into this battle, I go and attack Peach with a star, and Drybones as well, and when I hit both of them, they don't bother to reinflate their spare balloon, even though they still have a third one that they could use. Most of the time, a CPU will choose to reinflate their last balloon, but sometimes if you hit a CPU who started with 2 balloons, they'll just go on with their one remaining one, so you only have to hit them 2 times instead of 3 times. So you save a lot of time, but unfortunately it's not known what the probabilities are exactly for the CPUs choosing to inflate or not to inflate their last balloon. The third luck component is CPU routes. There's no way to quantify those probabilities, but essentially, this luck component is more favorable when the CPUs all converge together and you don't have to go as far to hit them once you've defeated one of them. And the routes are unfavorable if all the CPUs are spread out throughout the stage and you have to constantly drive around to get to the next one. Puddings discovered that the CPUs have a finite number of paths they can travel along, and she made maps for all 6 of the stages. I won't be covering these routes in detail in this video, but I'll be sure to mention them when I make videos for the specific stages in the future. Then the last component is the items the CPUs get. Sometimes your run can be damaged if one of them obtains something like a boo, a star, or triple greens, because it becomes harder to hit them in that case. We're going to see a video example where all 4 of these luck components come into play. At the beginning of this battle, you can see that 3 out of the 7 computers chose to inflate a third balloon, so this is slightly favorable because 4 computers went with the favorable option, 3 of them went with the unfavorable options. Later in this run, I hit Peach here, and this is where the roots come in. I see a Dry Bones running an opposite route to Peach, so I know that I have the opportunity to attack both of them at once with this bomb here, and I would have not been able to do that if they had given unfavorable movement patterns. The next luck example is from this item box here. I get a star, which is a 1 in 8 chance, then I get another item as soon as I use it, and it's once again a star, so that is a 1 in 64 occurrence of that happening. And then lastly here we have the CPU items, which could have been very unlucky here. Toad moves in, he's got a red shell, and he uses it at random, but it locks onto me, and it would have ended my run if I had not gotten triple greens or some other invulnerability item. So that's an example of how all 4 of the luck components can go in favor of you or against you any given run. Now that we've gone over the luck factors, let's go over the part of the runs that you can control. Let's start with the most basic strategy in Balloon Battle, chaining items, which means that as soon as you use one item, you go and get a next item as fast as possible. If you get a shell or a bomb, you want to hold it behind you, and if you get triple reds or triple greens, you want to hold them by your side as soon as you get them, so that your item slot becomes vacant and you can go and get another item. You want to stay in areas where there are many item boxes, and you don't want to go chasing computers in areas where there aren't many of them, because you'll find that you'll often look at computers and watch them, but you have no real way to attack them because there aren't any items nearby. If many CPUs are within attacking distance, or if a red shell can be thrown towards them, you can chain from the same item box or set of item boxes. So what I mean within attacking distance, that you can throw a red shell and it's got a clear path towards them, or you think you can hit them with a green shell or bomb from far away. If you think you can do that, you can just stay at your set of item boxes and remotely attack them. We'll see an example of this in some footage. During this run on Nintendo DS, I make sure never to leave too far from the blue part of the track, and this allows me to stay within that ring of item boxes and continue to just draw red shells, throw them at the computers over and over again. You see here I leave it for a few seconds, but I make sure to come back so that I can continuously get items and hurt computers as soon as they become vulnerable from their previous hit. Next, there are the A-B adjustments. A common misconception is that to go fast, or to complete a battle fast, you must constantly drive forward and stay at top speed. It's okay to slow down or even stop and turn, especially if there are items nearby, as we just saw in the example. And the best way to steer when you slow down is to hold A and B at the same time and then rotate using either the analog stick or a D-pad if you're playing on a DS. And this can also help if ever you want to throw a red shell in a more precise direction or even a green shell too. Here's an example of the A-B turnaround in practice. I draw triple red shells from this item box, and when I go there to throw one red shell, and I have the dry bones here who still has two balloons, I quickly steer myself around so I can turn back and hit him again. The next strategy is switching and multitasking. Switching means that if you're targeting or chasing one CPU and you think you'd be better off chasing another, you can just abandon the CPU you were chasing and then go a different path. Here we can see a switch. First I hit Mario, then he goes back into this room, while a Waluigi is nearby. Then Mario decides that he wants to go into this other room here, and I think I have a better shot at doing more damage to this Waluigi because he's heading outside toward the perimeter balcony. And when he does that, I just abandon Mario, target Waluigi, and I'm able to eliminate him by hitting him and making him drive off the edge. Multitasking is a bit more complex, but it is essentially just performing two switches very quick. Or multitasking can also be that once you've hit a computer, you try and go and grab an item while they're invulnerable. The point is that once you hit a CPU, you do not want to just stare at them and wait until they're vulnerable again. You want to find something to do during the few seconds that you can't hit them, and those things you can do during that time is really just grab an item or hit someone else. Here's a common example. When you play with one balloon, you'll find that you get triple red shells quite often. And if you have two computers nearby, what do? The naive answer would be to hit all three red shells on one computer so that you can stay focused, but I have a better answer. Let's go to the tape. In this clip, I draw red shells from the item box here, and notice that there is two computers, a Dry Bones and a Daisy, that are driving in similar directions. I throw one red shell at the Dry Bones, and now he is invulnerable for almost 3 full seconds, so I don't want to just wait for him. Instead, I drive past him and throw a red shell towards Daisy. It's important that if you're ever in a situation like this, that you want to drive past the first CPU before firing a red shell at the second one, because the red shells have a mind of their own and are still susceptible to targeting vulnerable CPUs, even when there is no benefit to doing so. So I move up here, hit Daisy, and then after Dry Bones is vulnerable again, I hit him. You might notice that he just got eliminated there, even though he was in the process of reinflating a second balloon. This shouldn't have killed him, but it did because I hit him in the critical hit window. The critical hit window is a small time frame that occurs after a CPU with two balloons has been hit. They will be invulnerable for most of the time that they're reinflating their last spare balloon, but while they're reinflating it, there's just this tiny window after their invincibility window runs out, but before they completely finish reinflating the second balloon. And if they're hit in that time, it counts as the CPU being hit with just one balloon, which means that it's an instant elimination. This window is only accessible on easy difficulty, because another variable between difficulties is the speed at which CPUs reinflate their balloons. On normal or hard mode, there is no window, but on easy mode there's a window that I've calculated to be somewhere between 1/5 and 1/4 of a second. Here's a full timeline. Once you hit a CPU with a shell or a star, you reach this 0 point here, and this is when they're still tumbling. This point here is when they'll lose the balloon from the star or shell hit, and from this point you can't even steal their balloons, you can't do anything to them. And approximately 2.7 or 2.8 seconds after they've been hit, this is when the critical hit window opens, and at around 3 seconds it closes, so not a lot of time to work with there. I colored this chart based on the best and worst times to hit a CPU who's just been hit. The best being the critical hit window, and the worst being in this time frame. It's always better to hit the CPU late than early. So you want to keep that in mind because there's no setup for doing the critical hit window, and it's something that you'll have to practice. You might be wondering, why is this bar orange? What makes this different from this part here? And the answer to that is that while a CPU is tumbling, they cannot be hit with another shell or star, but they can have their balloon stolen. This strategy was discovered by a Japanese player named Toa and later independently discovered by myself. I named this strategy the Henderson. A Henderson, like mentioned, is achieved by stealing their balloon while they're tumbling, and the window to perform a Henderson is around 1.4 seconds. However, this strategy is much less common for a few reasons. First, you need to get a shell or star item, and then get a mushroom item right after, which is an uncommon combination to get. And the obvious disadvantage to this strategy is that even though you can use it to instantly eliminate a CPU with 2 balloons left, you steal their balloon, so now you have a second balloon and a worse mix of items to choose from. So it's not extremely popular, but it is sometimes used towards the end of a speedrun. I named this strategy the Henderson because a baseball player called Ricky Henderson was famous for hitting for bases and then stealing. And just like Henderson did, all you gotta do is hit the CPU for 1 balloon and then steal their second. Here is a video where I've tried to do as many critical hit window and Hendersons as possible. Here at 25 seconds I use the star method, so I activate the star on Wario here, and I wait for him to reinflate, and I drive up to him right as I think this window is running out. You want to drive a bit slowly if possible, because you do have a bit of time to stick to the computer. When you normally bump into one of them, you get a bump that sends you back the other way, but when you're using a star and the computer is invulnerable, you can just brush against them and hope that when you do brush against them, you hit them for a few frames, and one of those frames happens to be the critical hit window. So he goes down here, and he is eliminated. Next is the method with a shell. You can see the Yoshi run into a fake item box on the screen below here, and he has just been hit with 2 balloons. I see this, and I anticipate that he's going to try to reinflate a second balloon. And when throwing a shell, you want to consider how big the balloon looks when the CPU is visible, and you want to consider how far away you are from it, because you gotta account for the travel distance or the travel time the shell takes to get to the CPU. And it just takes a lot of practice, but you can see I do it there. And then right here I do the same thing. I have 2 shells, hit Mario once, and then just hit him again right there. Here is another example of a critical hit window. This is a rare opportunity, but if ever it comes up, it's good to know this. If you have a shell and a bomb, there's actually a setup that you can use to hit the critical hit window every time. First, you wait until the CPU loses their first balloon, and you stand behind them a little bit. Then you drive and accelerate towards them, drop the bomb backwards, and the bomb will explode, and it will always deal damage for a few frames in a window that will overlap with the CPU's critical hit window. And if you do this fast enough, the CPU should always be hit with 1 balloon left on the first possible frame. The one thing you want to remember when doing this strategy is that you want to accelerate, because if you don't accelerate, there's a chance that you are caught in the explosion too, and that if you have 1 balloon, then that means your run is over. Here's an example of a Henderson. I wait until Toad has fully reinflated his second balloon so that I can demonstrate this strategy. So I hit him and he's tumbling from a shell, and then I use a triple mushroom and he is instantly eliminated. A more clear example of this can be seen right around here when Wario is driving on the bridge. I aim a green shell at him and then use another mushroom and eliminate him as well. When you acquire a second balloon, sometimes it's best to try and find a way to lose it on purpose. If you perform a Henderson, it's a good idea to do that, but there are other occasions where you might get a second balloon. For example, if you get triple mushrooms and you're trying to use them to just waste them, you might accidentally run into a CPU while doing that, causing you to get a second balloon. And if you have a golden mushroom, sometimes you'll waste time for 7 or 8 seconds. So you might as well just try to get a couple of balloons knocked away and then just go ahead and lose them on purpose. The good news is that if ever you get a second balloon, your mix of items changes so that there's a pretty high chance that you get either like green shells, bananas, fake item boxes, or bombs, and all of those items can easily be used to take out your own balloon on purpose. I don't always do this, but sometimes I try to lose a balloon on purpose if there are 3 or more CPUs left in the stage. I call this the rule of twos because if there's only 2 CPUs left and I somehow get a second balloon, I just proceed with the fight and try to finish it as is. We'll see an example of how I can lose a balloon on purpose in another circumstance. In this video, I start the battle by getting a red shell here and firing it at Peach, who starts with 2 balloons, tries to reinflate a third one, but doesn't do it on time, so now she's gonna have to start reinflating a second balloon. And I believe that if I use a mushroom here to hit her in the critical hit window, then it would actually save time, because if I didn't do that, that would be 2 balloons that I would leave on the table and refuse to take out. So what I do here is that I boost into her right in the critical hit window and then just drive out of bounds to lose a balloon on purpose. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I know that this is a lot of information to take in, as Balloon Battle is an extremely dynamic speedrun that doesn't always play out the same way, and these strategies may feel very isolated from each other, but in practice in some runs, they are all used in conjunction. I'm going to play a segment of a run of an all stages world record, where I will show a 23-second clip and then you will try to identify as many strategies as possible, and then after the clip is paused and rewound, I will explain what strategies were used. I start by drawing a red shell and then holding it behind me so I can grab another item here. I then fire the red shell in this general direction because there's 3 CPUs nearby and that red shell is bound to lock onto one of them. I also fire the red shell because I want to chain from this next item box on the slope when I get the item I just got here. So when it's triple reds, I deploy them immediately and think about what I can do with them. I see that DK is being hit, so I know that he's invincible for a few seconds, so I use this as an opportunity to multitask, hit Mario, chain from this item, turn back towards DK, and then hit him in the critical hit window. I then turn around with the intention to target Waluigi, however he ends up going too far and Toad runs an opposite route, so I do a switch right here so that I can start targeting him instead, and then I hold this green shell back so that I can chain again from the slope box. I hit Toad right as his invincibility runs out. This is something that is also done with a lot of practice. And then with the last red shell, I was gonna throw it at Peach, but she went too far, so my backup plan is that I see Toad moving this way on the mini-map, and I perform an A-B turnaround so that I can hit him and remove his last balloon, and I then segue this A-B turnaround um, into an opportunity to hit Peach over here, get this red shell, chain from this item box. I wait until I see what it is. I see that it's a star and that she's reinflating a second balloon, so this is another opportunity for the critical hit window, which I execute here once again. That concludes the technical aspects of Balloon Battle Percent. I just wanted to take one extra minute to talk about the psychological aspect. you don't want to think about the risks of losing the battle because the reward of getting a personal best or a world record is much higher than the disappointment from a lost run. So you want to go with an offensive mindset and rather than a defensive mindset. You're not trapped in the battle stage with the CPUs, they're trapped in there with you, and you must unleash your wrath upon them. And then lastly, you want to make an assumption while you're getting an item, but you don't know what it is. You want to always assume that you're getting a good item. And here's a table that explains it. If you're expecting a good item and you do get one, then you can get ready to attack because while you're drawing the item, you can look at the CPUs nearby and think, I'm going to throw this red shell over there, or if it's a green shell, I'm going to aim it in that direction. And if you expect a bad item but get a good one, you're extremely unprepared because you haven't thought about what you could do if you do get a good item. And if you expect a bad item and get a bad one, that can be quite discouraging for your run and make you feel like the run is rigged against you, even though it's just dumb luck. And if you expect a good item and you get a bad item, you're caught off guard, but you're not any worse off than you were if you were expecting a bad item. So in this case, it's better to always have an optimistic mindset. And also, knowing all of these strategies is only half the battle. It doesn't matter how many times you watch this video or how many times you watch a clip of a run, you need to go out there and practice because the more you the practice, better you get. I will now open up discussion for your questions. You can ask about the clarity of the presentation if any of the strategies were unclear or if you want to see a video go more in depth about any individual tactic. I can try to make one. If you have a request for an individual stage guide you want me to do, I'll do the one for the first responder that comments. And if you think that I missed any other relevant strategies that could be used to enhance a speedrun, please let me know so I can also do that in another video. And aside from that, let me know any comments. Do you think this presentation was clear or unclear? Were there aspects that could be improved? Thank you for watching. Special thanks to Anthony for testing the balloon probabilities, Puddings, she tested out the route mapping, and made the category rules that are in speedrun.com to this day. Picalex for his snail to snake tutorials that inspired me to do one for Balloon Battle, and the Mario Kart speedrunning community for giving me motivation for this project. Thanks again for watching.